but I'm delighted that the Deputy Commissioner, Peter McKechnie, is here to speak in his place. So please welcome Peter McKechnie. Thanks, Peter, for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. And yes, it was with a little bit of short notice this morning that the Commissioner rang. The minute he opened his mouth, I thought, well, I know where this is going for the day. But he does. He sincerely passes on his apologies to each and every one of you. And he was absolutely looking forward to getting here. And as late as last night was speaking about it. So can I just take the opportunity to also acknowledge Uncle Warren, the traditional owners, elders, past, present and emerging, our new Minister, Minister Dib, the Shadow Minister, Scott Campbell, Sharon and the board members from the RFSA. But most importantly, I think to each and every one of you, our members that are with us today and right across the weekend. Whilst I suppose I got the late call up, it is an absolute pleasure to be able to be here today. So many people, the opportunity to catch up. I think it is an exceptional agenda that the RFSA has put together for the weekend, and I hope each and every one of you do get a lot out of it. Thank you to the RFSA. It's not only this conference, but it was mentioned before about the Family Fun Days. You do so much for our members, day in, day out, but these events where you bring the members together, every time I get the opportunity to go to one of them, I think they're pretty special. And I think in terms of our members being able to look out for each other, they present such an ideal opportunity for it. They're away from that normal brigade grind of what it takes to manage a brigade and the like. So again, thank you for what it is you do to the members. As an executive at the RFS, we have the absolute honour, I suppose I would describe it as, of leading, just over 70,000 members, volunteers, staff, right across the state of New South Wales. You think about that number, it puts the population of somewhere between the Blue Mountains and Tweed Heads of the organisation that it is that, as I say, we have the honour and at times the challenges for what goes on in our organisation. We have so many strengths, but ultimately all of you sitting in the room, all of the people in your brigades, support brigades, our staff, it's the people that will ultimately always be our most valuable asset and be what it is that allows us as an organisation to do what it is we do for each of our local communities. Looking at some of our membership, 71,400 volunteers, 23.7% of them are women, 1.5% are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background. The largest age cohort, it's probably not surprising here, is 55 to 64-year-olds at some 19-odd%. One thing that is good to note is that in terms of our young members, which may not be any of us necessarily in the front row, of course, except for Sharon, is the 18 to 30-year-olds that make up some 12.5% of our volunteers right across the state. I think if you look at that, whilst not the biggest percentage, but 12.5% bodes well for the organisation going into the future in terms of being able to continue to engage with those communities, build on that and build on the strength of our brigades. Since 2019, we've seen a number of peaks and troughs as we always have in our membership, but overall that baseline has remained relatively stable. After every major season, major fire, we do see those spikes. And in 2020, we then saw that spike with some easing afterwards. And obviously with some of those challenges of COVID too, where people engaging in things right across their communities was so challenging. We've heard it here mentioned already a few times this morning, and I suspect this will be something that will become a conversation across the weekend. We are very mindful of the fatigue that our members are going through. It's not just the fires, but we've come straight out of it into COVID, through the flooding, and it's not just that physical fatigue, not just that mental fatigue, but the flow on to the PTSD, people seeing and experiencing things that none of us necessarily planned for when we got involved in the organisation. And we know that will be something that will challenge people as we go into another fire season, as well as we start to get back to doing those things. But I suppose last time we were doing it in great effort was 1920, when we saw so much tragedy right across the state. I heard it here mentioned already this morning. Succession is a bit of a buzzword of 2023. We have had a coronation, as was pointed out. It seems to be on the mind of global media dynasties right across the world, if you believe the TV series. Anyway, it is there. But can we encourage each and every one of you back at your brigades to consider that succession? Think about that 12.5% that I touched on earlier. Make sure you're doing everything you can to incorporate those members, younger members, into your brigade. And I think the other challenge that we have to put our hand up and accept as an organisation is making sure that our female members of our organisation are also part of that succession. We must be able to reflect on our communities. We must be able to ensure that everybody that is part of the community and is part of our organisation has that opportunity and is able to ultimately, I suppose, form part of what we are and where we're going into the future. We're striving as an organisation ultimately to build that talent, create career progression, and women have to be part of that. And as we move them into operational leadership roles, you all need to be looking at that in your brigades as well and ensuring our next deputy captains, our next group officers are representative of what it is our membership and ultimately what is representative of our communities. Just 4.6% of our female volunteers, that's just 106 women, have a leadership role across the organisation. And whilst I applaud their efforts for what they've been able to do in the organisation, can I just say, I think it also highlights the challenge we have to still make sure that we, as I say, do everything we can to even that up, to look at if we're fully engaged with all parts of our membership. So AGM season, maybe it's the time to start now and immediately look at it back at your brigades, as I say, as it flows into our group officers. Because one of the things we see ultimately is that's also where we build into our staff roles as well. They're the people who come out of those brigade leadership roles so often into another leadership role in the organisation. One sec. As I touched on, we've lived through Black Summer, COVID, floods, and one thing, as the Minister touched on, the RFS has been there. You as members have been there for each and every one of those things in one way or another, committing to taking on other tasks, fighting fires in your community, doing the mitigation work to protect your community, but ultimately showing how versatile you are and what can be done to support local communities, whether you live in them, whether they're across the state, across the country, or as was touched on, right across the world. And it's never been so true than over the last 4 years. We had, as I say, the catastrophic fires for 1920. Most of you in the room, if not every single person in the room, would have experienced that exhaustion of the long shifts that you put in. And not only on the fireground, but coming back, organising other crews and being able to then look at what the impact was on your communities and work with those communities after the fires as part of it. We got through those fires and whilst inquiries, and we've still got the coronial going on, we were straight into COVID. And again, as our members, we saw the organisation step up. And I'll probably just make particular mention that during the COVID-19 response as it was, and what we all lived through, members in the far west, districts like Cumberland and Macarthur, and I know there was a lot of other things in the state as well, but just stood up day after day, week after week in delivering food hampers, checking on elderly people in their communities. It's just amazing service. We then moved straight into flooding. Well, we actually moved into flooding before COVID. We dealt with COVID. We had flooding to come out of COVID. And we saw such devastating floods over such a long period of time. Not only obviously what started on the north coast around Lismore particularly, but then played out right through so many communities across the state, Lismore to Yagara, Western Sydney, Burke, ultimately on through areas like Menindee, through Wentworth in southern New South Wales, and then, well, we passed the baton on to South Australia. But when we ultimately did that, we ended up with aircraft and members in South Australia as well. So it was just an unending presence. We saw people rescued from rooftops, trees, out of cars, and just giving residents a hand, cleaning out properties and the rest. Can I say, as we reflected on this quite often as an executive, we would go out and visit different people, and when you came back with such a feeling of pride to be able to stand there. I remember standing in South Lismore with one of the local group officers up there, and a number of out-of-area units, a number of local units, and so many people from the local units that were affected by flooding themselves, but just wanted to do more to help their local community. I'll never forget standing in Yagara talking with the captain of Yagara Brigade, who was absolutely focused on what else could be done to assist that little local community that had been so devastated. But ultimately, he knew he had to get back to cleaning out his butcher shop and his house so that he could consider how he would not only get back to earning an income, but how he'd also live. So just incredible stories, and as the Minister touched on, repeated right across the state, and so many things we didn't hear about. During that same time, probably something that wasn't as well known, we were dealing with floods still. And then for here in New South Wales, or for that matter, the country, the potential of an outbreak of foot and mouth disease was a very real risk. We saw members starting to assist with planning. We were talking to members about it. We're talking with our districts and working with our agency colleagues about how would we assist if foot and mouth was to be a reality for us here in New South Wales. But not only that, how would we go about firefighting if foot and mouth was now had a presence here in New South Wales? At the same time, varroa mite infestation that it started in the Hunter Valley, and we saw impacts right across the state, and again had an extended impact into the rural environment. And we saw members, staff and volunteer who again put up their hand to help out with something that we probably wouldn't have naturally expected we would get involved with. The Minister that touched on this, just recently there was the demonstration of the calibre of our people when the Commissioner had the pleasure of being able to present 79 people, plus brigades and other unit awards with St Florian's Day awards. So many awards that were related to valour, courage, not only the service that had been put in for over such a long period of time and in so many challenging events, but people had dug deep and ultimately put themselves at risk for their communities. And again, many of you would have, if you haven't all, would have read or watched the online presentation around that. And what stood out to me, I suppose, a little bit of it was there was just so many of them that were about weeks of work of people who, again, were putting themselves in front of their local communities. We'll take the opportunity. Nominations are always open for the St Florian's Awards, and I think it is something that we need to actually do better as an organisation still. So if you have those people in your district, in your brigade, that have done that little bit more, that have committed to that thing that, you know, they really put themselves in danger, consider that. It is okay to recognise them for it. It's not just part of doing the job. So much that people do is actually above and beyond what anyone would ever expect of them. The RFSA, right through those flooding operations, and for that matter, every major event we have is always there, you know, be it, you know, arrangements with McDonald's, coffee stands, turning up with shirts. You see members of the board and council right across the state coming together to follow those major events round. And whilst we'll always have that responsibility and we want to make sure we're providing for the welfare of our members, what you do as an association, I think, just makes that little bit of difference. There's nothing like, you know, before a terrible day of dealing with floods at Lismore at the staging area, being able to grab a coffee of the morning and just provide that little bit of, I suppose, nicety around it. So again, thank you for what you do there. I think there's an overwhelming theme in what I'm saying here today, which is ultimately the lesson we can take away from it is we need to be ready for everything. The Minister touched on our brigades are in every community right across New South Wales. And I know that a lot of members say, the reason I joined is I just want to deal with the fires. And that's okay. If that's why a member joins, that's your choice as a member of the organisation. But what we also see is when their local communities are impacted by other events, disasters and the like, people put up their hands and want to be able to do more. And what we've got to make sure we're doing is preparing people for those things as well. So as we work as an organisation, we work with the association, we work with the government, we will continue to look at what else do we need to provide? What other types of training do we need to consider? What other capabilities do we need to build as an organisation? Because it's not just about putting our hand up to do more, which we will always do and have a can-do attitude. It is about as well ensuring that when that member of a brigade that maybe didn't want to get involved in any more than firefighting originally, but says, I've now watched my community almost wiped off the face of the map with a flood, I want to help, that we can have as much as possible in place so that they can do that. We know that climate change is ultimately resulting in longer, more extreme fire seasons and more erratic weather more often. Now, the why, it's beyond me to have the debate. But what I do know is we need to be more prepared for it and continue to change so that we can be more prepared for it. Emergency services as a whole, ourselves, SES, fire rescue, our land management colleagues, we must be ready to be adaptable, flexible, and at a constant readiness to respond to these events, well beyond what we would have traditionally considered our business as usual practices. Does have implications. I talk about planning, I talk about what we must do, but we've already started taking those steps, I suppose, for the lessons we learned, particularly around the flooding. We're looking at new training. It's almost ready to roll out for working in floodwaters at different tiers in terms of just the basic things that go with throw lines and life jackets being on every appliance or available every appliance right across the state. Those resources have been ordered, but we're now finishing off the training so that all of you will be able to do that in a simple way, online training, so that when that next event does happen, you have that little bit more knowledge around it, that you're able to safely operate and you have some of the gear to do it. We've out here today in the display area, there's a couple of boats. One of them is what we're targeting for brigades where we end up with an on-water rescue presence as well. The boat that's out there is actually to go out to Menindee, which, you know, isolated for such a long period of time. And ultimately, it's not just about what they do in a flooding operation, but they weren't able to provide fire protection to some parts of their community without having some sort of marine capability. The VRA was able to assist us during this recent event, but that'll be a permanent asset that'll be out in Menindee. And I encourage you to have a look at it, because that's the sort of asset we're looking at for a number of brigades right across the state, for which we're starting to talk to around an initial trial, and then extending that in partnership with SES and the other agencies and our work with the State Rescue Board around that. Some people have wondered why we need so much of this extra equipment. I do encourage you to, as you heard, Scott actually got a Commissioner's Commendation earlier, or on St Florian's Day, for his work during the floods for a flood rescue. There is a picture of Scott during that flood rescue. For those that you haven't seen, you should sidle up to him maybe tonight and ask him to, I get why we need the equipment now. I'm sure Scott will love it to show it to everyone. I won't. As we go forward, and again, our Minister touched on this, our collaboration with other agencies is going to be oh so important. We've always worked closely with SES, Fire Rescue, obviously the Forest Corporation and National Parks, but how we work with our agency colleagues right across government, how we enhance our collaboration, how we share resources with those kindred agencies is going to be vital, because I don't think any government's ever going to be in a position to ultimately give every agency every individual thing that they might need on an independent basis. So how we work together will be vital. You know, we'll continue to support SES right across New South Wales, but you look at what we've done in the Northern Territory with the Northern Territory government and SES with a base camp, with people to assist with that base camp, to help those affected communities over what will still be months, is an example of it. Could Northern Territory, you know, justify putting that type of resource in a warehouse ready to go when it exists in states like New South Wales and Victoria? Why would they? We can share it. We've got our current deployment to Canada, which is about recognising they came and helped us, but it is also about building the capability of our members. Having had the honour of going to the States a number of times and Canada, I know that our members will come back from the deployment overseas with another skill set, an enhanced skill set, another set of experiences, which they'll be able to pass on right through the organisation. And other unique ventures that we'll look at, Gamesh touched on it. We ran a trial this season with Surf Lifesaving New South Wales and used the aircraft based at Coffs to be able to do beach patrols of a weekend when the beaches are more crowded. But also, it was deliberately targeting non-patrolled beaches in that Coffs Coast and Mid-Coast area. And the ability to put a surf life-saving person in the aircraft with one of our rescue operators, patrol those beaches, I'm going to say it was a resounding success. How we do it in the future and look at expanding that with surf life-saving, we'll continue to work on. But out of that, we saw a number of days where they actually ended up down low using the siren and warning people about sharks. They were actually able to find a lost kayaker who just, wasn't in the best of positions, able to get them to a sandbar, able to get direct surf life-saving ground or water resources to them in that instance. But they're the sort of things we'll continue to look at. Doesn't mean that we take the eye off the ball in, I suppose, what people will always term our core business. In 1900 odd, when the residents in the local area of Berrigan gathered at the Royal Hotel, I'm not sure they would have saw what is now the organisation. But one thing I know that, I'm quite confident about is they would have looked at it and said, well, this is just about helping our local community. It's not about getting caught up in what we can't do, is what can we do to help our local community? But we won't take an eye off those core business. Since the 2019-2020 fires, an incredible amount of energy and determination, coupled with funding enhancements, has been invested into this organisation, and to look at better ways to protect our members firstly, and ultimately our communities. We're building facilities and supplying resources and equipment to improve not only capabilities and safety, but to enhance our decision making, to be able to look at what else it is we can do. It's beyond just the tankers, which, whilst there's been some 500 odd, I think it is at the moment, delivered since 1920, we've seen, been able to, I suppose, step forward with something we know you were seeking around respiratory protection. But we've also been able to start looking at some of the technology to help you do what it is to take a brigade to operate, what it is to make decisions on a fireground, what it is to make decisions ultimately in an incident management team. We've seen RFS Active rolled out. I think one of the things that we absolutely learnt there was BART was a popular thing. We probably took a path for a little while, which was looking at how can we reinvent the wheel. And I think we learned a great lesson that RFS Active seems to have been so successful because we took something that you all already enjoyed using, you found useful. We had to touch up some things to make it fit across an entire organisation, but we got there. By the next start of this next impending fire season, we'll actually see all 43 of our districts will be on the centralised dispatch on CAD. When we started that program, and I see Matt Smith sitting there, which I think was about 11 years ago now, there was more questions around how we would ever get there rather than if we would. But ultimately, by the next fire season, we'll be there. And it's an amazing amount of change that comes with it. And I thank you all for a little bit of patience at times with working with us about how we can actually do that. We're connecting stations to the internet. We have rollout of MDTs into our appliances right across the state. And what we'll also be working on is, whilst we knew that we would have a degree of PSN coverage within a good degree of 4G coverage, we're also just finalising how that will work in terms of satellite connectivity as well. It won't necessarily mean that every single appliance every second of the day has connectivity, but I tell you what, we'll go very close to it, and we'll certainly be able to ensure that we can do a better job with being able to share intelligence all the way back to an appliance and a decision maker, a group officer in the field and the like, be it maps, line scans, satellite imagery, access to procedures, so on and so forth. It's been a lot of work going over the last, probably about the last 14 months into a product we call Athena. which is an artificial intelligence-based system that is about providing situational awareness to decision makers. It is some slow steps for us at the moment. It's just been about our Section 44, our Class 3 incident controllers, but we'll continue to roll that out, and it'll be able to provide almost instant predictions of potential fire patterns. So rather than waiting for an FBA to be able to have the time to process it, and Lawrence laughs at me because I always annoy him about it, but it is about being able to provide an almost instant prediction of what this fire might do. It's still just that, a prediction, but it's also looking at what's potentially under that fire path. And that's where the AI comes in and starts to say, this fire is potentially going to do this. We know this from the data that exists across government of it's going to affect 2,000, potentially affect 2,000 people, 100 properties, a school, a hospital, compared to this fire that's going to be larger but doesn't seem to show the same pattern of what might affect, just to assist our decision makers. We've seen the RFS lead, and for that matter, the commissioner lead it as part of not only as our commissioner, but as the chair of the Australian Fire Danger Rating System. And when you look at it, you can't underestimate what that is. It's the most significant change we've seen in the way we look at what potential fire danger our communities are facing for over 50 years. It is about providing people with more information, a higher quality of information, again, to assist people in the RFS, people across other fire agencies, and ultimately the community to be able to make better decisions or more informed decisions about what they're going to do. As we develop, additional capabilities, we look at the technology, we can't forget, and we won't forget about ultimately the people, as I touched on, which are what our organisation is. We still need to ensure we're building that local experience, that local capability into every one of our IMTs. Using products like Athena doesn't take away from the fact that we still need people who have seen this fire 2 or 3 times before actually plug into it as well. So it is about how we marry them together. One of the things we certainly did see about in the impact to our people, both through the 2019-2020 fires, through COVID, through the flooding, was the welfare of our people. The RFS Benevolent Fund will be launched in the coming weeks, and this is just an incredible investment ultimately into the welfare of everyone. It'll be established with some $10 million of money that was from the monies donated from the public as a result of the 2019-2020 fires. And what that benevolent fund will do is give the opportunity for those people involved to be able to look at how to support members when them or their families are ultimately affected, be it at the worst of things where we have, and unfortunately we may see it again, around firefighters who are killed or significantly injured on our fire grounds, but just where some of our members are also facing incredible hardship. We're going through our workplace conduct project, which has obviously been led by Trina and her team. We've acknowledged, and the Commissioner was very public in acknowledging this some time ago, that we can do better in terms of where the conduct of certain members or the organisation isn't what others expect, where people's experience as a member of the organisation isn't all that it could be for them, and how we deal with that. We will, or we do, and we will continue to have an absolute zero tolerance for bullying, harassment of other people, and that inappropriate behaviour, which again just means that somebody's not getting the experience they deserve as a member of the organisation. Over coming months, there will be much more coming out in regard to that, both around the grievance and disciplinary framework, but also training to go with it, and how we will conduct a modern approach to what has been traditionally our disciplinary panels and the like. Mental health. Since the 1925s, we've invested some 17 million into our members through various mental health programs, including employing psychologists in our area basis, which is still an ongoing project. We've seen a greater concentration on SIS, the Members Assistance Program and chaplaincy services. And I've got to say, one of the things that I think we have stepped forward with is I see all of our notifiable incidents right across the state. And what I see so regularly now is not someone saying, we'll monitor for whether the brigade requires SIS, but a chaplain is going to the incident. SIS is already aware, somebody has been briefed, somebody is following up. So I encourage, like everyone else who has spoken this morning, look out for each other, encourage people to reach out for assistance, but we're also going to take all the proactive steps we can. Training of our people, building those capabilities is reliant on people being able to use it. We've seen the operational officer program reviewed again. The Oppo ones are going through some 12, it's a 13-week program, 12 weeks of which they spend at Dubbo. We've seen the academy expanded. We've seen so much work done in terms of ensuring our compliance with the PUA for the national training modules, but also starting to review what our training is in so many areas and ensure it's fit for purpose. This year in September, Paul, in September we'll see the Aviation Centre of Excellence will open at the State Training Academy. Again, another significant investment, some $7.5 million in regard to being able to build the capabilities of our people, but also across other agencies. And we're open to people from right across the country of being part of it, because the better capabilities we can build in our people in that aviation space, the better we can support all of you ultimately on the ground as well. Now, State of Origin came up before, and it might be a little bit early given the week we've had here in New South Wales with State of Origin, both the women's and the men's State of Origin. But we do have the Australian Cadet Championships coming up. We'll set a little bit of interstate rivalry. I'm sure we'll exceed all the other states. We have some 918 cadets who are going to carry the hopes of New South Wales on their shoulders, and maybe they can just make the State of Origin teams look a little bit ordinary along the way. And again, I'll thank the RFSA for their support of the championships and for what they do with cadets along the way as well. Something that I feel it's absolutely important to touch on as I come to an end is around the diversity and inclusion across the RFS. I touched on before the importance of how we ensure that we're engaging our female members in leadership roles in the organisation. But some of the things that we are doing in this space, which is beyond that, is we do have a plan being finalised at the moment around diversity inclusion, and that'll be something we'll all have to buy into. It's not a plan we can just develop, sit on the shelf and say we've done the plan. Each and every one of us are going to have to buy into the delivery of that. Our Reconciliation Action Plan, we hope to be able to say a lot more around that during NAIDOC week, but that is at the final stages of being finished off. We've seen the truck and the artwork project that was touched on or released during NAIDOC week 2022, and the launch of the Indigenous pin in 2021, which, as Scott touched on, was driven by the RFSA. And can I say in that space, I'll take a little bit of personal time at the moment. Even my own brigade, both of the appliances have had the Aboriginal artwork applied to them. And I've got to say, it is just, I'm just so proud to look at those trucks and see the connection they've created to Indigenous members of our brigade, but also to our community, and that connection back to the country that ultimately that brigade sits on it and works within. Mardi Gras this year, while some people had plenty to say about it, ultimately, what a moment for our entire executive to be able to join so many members from the RFS in terms of attending the Mardi Gras this year. It was an absolute pleasure to be there. And if you wonder why we need to make sure that we have the absolute belief in the diversity and inclusion across our organisation, what some members said back to the Commissioner, myself, Kyle, Trina and Stephen about how proud they were to have us come and show them their support. It was absolutely humbling that they felt that was a step that made them actually accepted in the organisation. And if you had any doubts, certainly people speaking to you that way does ultimately make it all worthwhile. What keeps us awake at night? Well, there was this was written in here for the commissioner, I think, but I'll actually use it as well. Well, it's not about making goat curries. Goat curries are actually a good thing, and the goats are doing a wonderful thing for it, but it's not what keeps us away. But as the minister touched on, hazard reduction. We have seen some years we've been able to get very little done due to the weather that we've experienced, and I suppose that's recognised through what I've said around the flood responses across the state. But we need to be taking every opportunity. There will be people at times who will criticise us for impacting them with smoke and the like, but I had the opportunity yesterday to speak on the media about the fact that there will be an impact at times. We accept that. We will do what we have to try and minimise it, but ultimately we have to get that work done. And my plan worked. If I went on too long, a helicopter would turn up and make me less interesting. But please, knock the doors down at your local fire control centre when you see the opportunity to do hazard reduction. We can't continue, I suppose, when we're so far behind with only 20% of what we plan to do, continue to operate in a way that we look for the opportunity. I want our culture to be that every day is the opportunity to do a hazard reduction, and you ultimately need to find a reason not to do it. And that's how we're going to catch up, because it's not just about catching up with the other 80% of work from this year where we're behind. There's the 2 years previous where we weren't able to get to it as well. It'll make a difference to your safety. It'll make a difference to the safety of the community. And still haven't seen a better way for brigades to work together and get to know each other than doing hazard reduction work. So the message is certainly out there. It is an absolute, there is no bigger priority for us as an organisation at the moment in terms of actions to take than doing hazard reduction work. Ultimately, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you to the entire RFSA for putting on, again, another amazing conference. Thank you for what you do all year round, as a matter of fact. Thank you to the Minister. Thank you to the Commissioner to be able to come up today and spend a bit of time with the members. It is very much valued. And thanks to each and every one of you for giving up just a little bit more time for ultimately what it is that you make work, which is the RFS. Thank you, everyone.